Imagine standing on a cold Atlantic dock before sunrise, the air thick with salt and steel dust, when something unbelievable happens. A warship that should have taken years to build is suddenly sliding into the water. Rivets still warm, paint barely dry. And somewhere far out at sea, German U-boat commanders are about to realize the ocean has turned against them. This is not a myth, not a movie exaggeration, but one of the most intense industrial miracles in human history. Ordinary workers, armed with blueprints, welding torches, and relentless resolve, built destroyers so fast that submarines could no longer keep up. At the start of World War II, the Atlantic was a graveyard. Cargo ships burned on the horizon. Sailors vanished without warning. U-boats ruled the sea lanes, choking supply lines and pushing the Allies toward collapse. The enemy's advantage wasn't just technology, it was time. Submarines could be built faster than the warships meant to stop them. Every sinking widened the gap. Victory at sea seemed mathematically impossible. But while U-boats hunted in darkness, something radical was taking shape back on the docks of the American East Coast. Not a secret weapon, not a new radar, but a revolutionary way of thinking about work itself. Shipbuilding, once slow and handcrafted, was about to be turned into an industrial race against extinction. Before the war, building a destroyer was a patient art. Crews worked sequentially. One team finished before another could begin. Hulls stayed in dry docks for months, sometimes years. Every delay meant more ships lost at sea. Traditional methods simply could not match the tempo of submarine warfare. Then the crisis hit. Sinkings surged. Britain begged for escorts. Convoys needed protection now, not years from now. The question was no longer how to build better ships, but how to build them faster than anyone thought possible. The answer came from an idea that sounded almost reckless at the time. Break the ship apart before it even existed. Instead of building a destroyer, piece by piece in one place, shipyards began constructing massive sections simultaneously. Hull blocks, engine rooms, gun mounts, living quarters. Entire chunks of warships were built in parallel, like pieces of a giant steel puzzle. This approach changed everything. While one crew welded the bow, another installed propulsion systems elsewhere. While electricians wired compartments off-site, armor plating was being riveted on another section miles away. Time was no longer linear. It multiplied. Workers who had never seen the ocean before were suddenly shaping the fate of it. Farmers, factory hands, welders, and women entering industrial jobs in record numbers all became part of a single, unstoppable machine. Training was fast. Standards were strict. Errors were unacceptable. Lives depended on every seam. Shipyards like those in Maine and along the East Coast transformed overnight. What had once been slow, echoing industrial spaces became roaring engines of nonstop production. Lights burned through the night. Shifts overlapped. Coffee and adrenaline fueled 16-hour days. Nobody asked how long the war would last. They asked how many ships could be launched this week. The destroyer became the symbol of this new tempo. Sleek, fast, and deadly. These ships were designed for one purpose: hunt submarines. And now they were being produced at a rate that stunned even military planners. Construction times were cut in half, then cut again. What once took over a year could be done in months and, in some cases, weeks. There are records of hulls assembled so quickly that crews barely had time to memorize the layout before sea trials. Stories of workers watching a ship launch and then reporting back to build another version immediately, improved by lessons learned just days earlier. Feedback loops replaced guesswork. Efficiency fed speed. Speed fed survival. Out at sea, the impact was immediate. Convoys that once sailed naked now bristled with escorts. Sonar pings echoed through the depths. Depth charges turned the ocean into a three-dimensional battlefield. U-boat captains who once stalked freely now found themselves hunted. The balance of fear shifted. German commanders began reporting a terrifying change. Where there had once been gaps, there were now walls of steel. Where they expected silence, there were propellers. The Atlantic was no longer empty, it was crowded with destroyers born from docks that refused to sleep. And here's the part that history often overlooks. This victory was not forged only by admirals or engineers. It was built by hands blistered from welding, by minds solving problems under impossible deadlines, by workers who understood that speed itself had become a weapon. Every rivet driven faster was another merchant ship saved. Every shortcut that didn't compromise safety meant food, fuel, and soldiers reaching Europe. Industrial output became frontline combat. The shipyard was as critical as any battlefield. Mistakes happened. Sections didn't always fit perfectly. Systems failed during early tests. But the genius of the process was adaptability. Designs were adjusted mid-production. Fixes were applied immediately. The next ship was always better than the last stand. It was already halfway built before the first one launched. This relentless momentum overwhelmed the enemy. Submarine losses mounted. Training replacements became impossible. Fuel shortages grew. The Atlantic tide turned, not because submarines suddenly became weak, but because destroyers became unstoppable. By the time Allied forces prepared for major offensives, the sea lanes were secure. Supplies flowed. Troops crossed safely. And the destroyers that made it possible were not miracles of luck. They were products of human organization pushed to its limit. Think about what that means. No superweapon, no last-minute invention. Just people, systems, and urgency aligned with absolute clarity of purpose. When survival demanded speed, speed was invented. Even today, modern manufacturing studies these shipyards, modular construction, parallel workflows, continuous improvement. These concepts powered today's factories, but their proof was written in wartime steel. Some of those workers never went to sea. They never fired a gun. Yet their labor echoed across the Atlantic, reaching depths they would never see. Every U-boat forced under, every convoy that arrived intact, carried their fingerprints. This is why the story matters. Because it reminds us that history doesn't always turn on explosions or speeches. Sometimes it turns on a clock. And on the decision to beat that clock at all costs. If this story changed the way you see history, subscribe and stay with the channel, because the next video reveals another hidden moment where speed, courage, and human ingenuity quietly rewrote the world. The docks eventually fell silent. The war ended. But the lesson remains. When ordinary people are given a clear mission and no time to fail, they can build the impossible fast enough to change the fate of oceans.